Just a second. Okay, there we go. Okay, just a quick note before we get started. We will be recording the session today and with closed captioning capability for anyone who is unable to participate in our WebEx session. I'm Dr. Robert Brown, Professor of History here at FLCC and organizer of the college's History, Culture, and Diversity series. Thanks for joining us to commemorate Hispanic Heritage Month, which is our annual opportunity to celebrate the diverse cultures of the Western Hemisphere's Hispanic, Latino, and Caribbean communities, and to examine key trends affecting the contemporary Hispanosphere. This event is made possible by the generous support and encouragement of FLCC's Office of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion. And I'd also like to thank Cheryl Tanike, whose invaluable technical assistance makes these sessions possible. Today's presenter is Caribbean scholar, author, and lecturer Megan Sylvester. Immediately following her presentation, we'll have a Q&A session. So if you could please keep your microphone muted until that time, that would be appreciated. Once we enter the Q&A period, you can unmute at will and pose questions directly to Megan, or you can type them into the chat box in the lower right-hand corner of your screen. And if Megan doesn't see them, I'll read them aloud or summarize them for her, and she'll respond. I'd like to now invite my colleague, Dr. Vera Wisman, Associate Professor of Sociology here at FLCC, to introduce our speaker. Dr. Wisman.
Thank you. I am delighted to be introducing Megan Sylvester on this occasion. For this talk. I have been, for the last few weeks, talking about her work to various people, and it's so interesting to try and describe. So let me start at the beginning, or for me at least, to try and describe. Dr. Sylvester holds a PhD from the University of West Indies in Trinidad and Tobago. She's the co-chair of the the Caribbean Studies Association, and widely published in music, ethnomusicography, and sociology more broadly. So, how to describe her work? Her PhD is in sociology. She is a music sociologist. She specializes, her area is Caribbean music forms, including the tradition of Carnival, the festival culture. So what is it, my students especially ask, so what does that mean to study music as a sociologist? She looks at the political and cultural meanings of music and festival, and always with an emphasis on cultures of resistance. As someone who studied LGBT movements for years, I'm especially excited by that when you see an understanding of social change, political change, social movement that moves beyond political organizing and direct protest, but understands things like artistic expression, music, party as parts of a culture of resistance. It's just incredibly exciting work. Her work crosses borders of all kinds, national borders, language borders, cultural borders, and certainly crosses the boundaries between the disciplines in the liberal arts. Her work is truly interdisciplinary. I'm taking a second here to point out that if everything works out, Dr. Sylvester will be teaching a course for us in the spring. semester in through the honors house, and please keep your eyes open on that. So again, it's with great delight that I introduce music sociologist Dr. Megan Sylvester. Thank you and welcome.
Okay, thank you very much, Professor Wisman, and thank you very much, Dr. Brown, for that wonderful introduction. I am now about to share my screen and introduce you to my work. Yes, is everyone seeing that? Yes? Yes. Everyone is hearing me? Okay, great. So, as I have been introduced, my name is Megan Sylvester, and today I am going to be presenting on the topic People Power Movements in Caribbean Festival Culture. But specifically, there is going to be a focus on Calypso music. So I'm going to be telling you a little bit about the music of Trinidad and Tobago in particular, and I'm going to be telling you about this experience that comes through Calypso. All right? So we're going to be looking today at the ways in which carnival culture has grappled with the issues of power, disempowerment, and empowerment during the pandemic. In many ways, COVID-19 has brought with it the cessation of power in several forms such as movement, work, and travel. In many carnival cultures, however, the grueling effects of the pandemic have not been able to stymie the creative genius of cultural expression. Instead, the concept of power has been re-engineered to possess new meaning in festival spaces, and one such example is Trinidad and Tobago, the islands on which this particular paper will focus. Now, I really want to speak to the whole issue of Calypso music, as I said earlier. And Calypso music is this music that has been created to be an integral part of carnival festivities in Trinidad and Tobago. Giuseppe Sofo in his 1994 book would have indicated carnival memory and identity makes these type of linkages between carnival and calypso music. In particular, going on, he speaks to the Carnival of Trinidad is a performative ritual of cultural resistance and awakening, claiming a space and celebrating freedom from any kind of oppression. The history of this ritual is strictly connected to the process of cultural decolonization and political independence. So we're taking it all the way back to the intersections that would have taken place between European colonization, slavery or enslavement of African peoples, and their interrogation of that scenario and the way in which they operationalized it. Issues of political independence, as I said, of the Caribbean, and getting back to issues of the motherland. And therefore, it is in Carnival and for Carnival that Trinidadians and Tobagonians have successfully fought colonialism to gain their freedom. So Carnival and Calypso is really seen as festival music. It's also seen as music that speaks specifically to resistance and music that really speaks to a coming out and getting a sense of freedom. But we want to really have a better understanding of Calypso music. Why is Calypso music even important? The first known recording of Calypso music was in 1912. And these particular authors, Sylvester, Alfonso, and McDowell, in a 2013 article, make the point that the history of Calypso's foray into the international music arena in the journal An Era Revisited, Trinidad and Tobago's indigenous music, first recordings, first live performances, and first publishing, and first recordings, this really tells the trajectory or gives a sense of the lifespan of Calypso music starting in 1912. And this is important to note because if this is the first known recording, it definitely indicates that Calypso existed before that time.
Excuse me, Megan. There's a gray box that's appearing on our screen. Apparently, if you hit Control Shift Q, you can remove that.
Yes.
There we go.
Right.
Thank you.
And you're very welcome. Calypsos made within this particular period that we're talking about, from 1912 coming down, actually were instrumentals. And this becomes so important to note because the first band, this first Calypso recording was by Lovey, George Bailey, and Lionel Velasco. and Belasco-led string bands often included his cousin Cyril Monroe on the violin and Gerald Clark on guitar or cuatro. And this exposure of Trinidadian musicians to the New York music scene gave credence to this local indigenous music as having worldwide appeal. And this becomes so important as we consider calypso music and we're talking about issues of the pandemic and reach and engagement. During the 1910 and 1920s recording of calypso, they were made in New York for both Caribbean and Latin American markets. And so again, we're looking at the whole concept of the reach of calypso music during this particular period of time. But by the 1930s, there was a renewed focus on recording calypso for international markets. And there we have 4 examples of calypsonians who would have exploited their careers using calypso music in the international space. Attila the Hun, the Roaring Lion, Lord Executor, and the Growling Tiger. And so now we're really going to start looking, now that we've had a sort of introduction to calypso music and its international impact and reach, let's switch now some gears to look at COVID-19 and its impact. It has severely impacted global economies. The disruption and disempowerment of industry structures which the pandemic has created requires a reassessment of the issues of vulnerability and sustainability across sectors. Within the corporate sector, managers have had to reimagine and re-employ responsive strategies to treat with financial and contractual obligations to employees. Specifically, a business model rethink, together with a reactive rather than a proactive strategy for growth and stimulus, has been the new normal. Further, to mitigate significant losses, several companies have had to reduce employee workload, institute work-from-home arrangements, establish cost-cutting mechanisms, and access financial assistance from government welfare safety nets. And so we try to understand now that we have that corporate sense. Let's look now to see what's happening in the international business community in terms of the international music industry. The recording sphere, the recording and publishing sectors have noted the reassessment of the priorities in consumer behavior towards music and music products and services. In fact, according to Mulligan 2020, with the closure of recording studios and delayed project release timelines, there have been disruptions to the recorded music supply chain. And now we turn to looking at publishing, music publishing. Gilbert 2020 notes that music supervision has catapulted from a constant flow of income from TV, film, and advertising productions to an intermittent trickle of music-related briefs since the coronavirus appeared on the scene. And now we turn to live music, because calypso music, strictly speaking, is a live performance art. So we're going to make that connection between live music in terms of the international space and the impact of COVID-19 and what has happened with calypso music in Trinidad and Tobago as a result. While there has been a clear disruption by COVID-19 on the recorded music and publishing sectors, the live music sector has experienced the highest interference and reduced power differential. Cancellations and postponement of live music events, inclusive of technology conferences to major concerts to smaller scale individual performances and festival band shows, have been ubiquitous. Added to this have been the horrors of ticket refunds and loss of down payments for venues and management services, which place added pressure on major ticket distributions such as Ticketmaster. In response to these challenges, companies have had to furlough 20% of their team, and we're looking here at Billboard as an example, as part of the broader plan to cut $500 million in expenses. But I make the point that all is not lost. COVID-19 has brought about new opportunities, from my vantage point, for the creation of commerce, new fund sources, and alternative options for fan engagement and reach for artists. And this particular paper that I'm presenting today intends to highlight one such case using radio, TV, and streaming businesses in Trinidad and Tobago. Now, I started off this presentation talking about calypso, and I'm also going to be mentioning soca. So calypso music is considered mother music, and soca is one of its derivatives, meaning that there's a particular beat per minute for calypso music, and it's a sped up beat for soca music. So several calypso and soca artists in the Twin Island economy of Trinidad and Tobago took their performance power back during the 2021 carnival season and appeared in several events online. Virtual music shows became the dominant form of festival culture as headlines took to the airwaves. Concerning itself with impact, identity, and socio-demographic, correlates how musicians and the music industry organize to provide musical content in a world plagued by the pandemic. This paper will seek to explore these intersections using a music sociological lens. As adjustments to COVID-19 emerged out of the new normal, Trinidad and Tobago's calypso and soca music space used technology to transform the direction and delivery of performances in the age of the coronavirus and shift the power differentials in the music industry. Methodologically, a case study approach is being used in this analysis, which focuses specifically on the KMP Music Group, looking at the work of Kenny Phillips as the main ideas creator, and looking at his group, which is inclusive of WAC Radio, WAC TV, the KMP Music Lab, an audio company, a video company, and a video editing company, all backed by state-of-the-art streaming facility. So let's look at the process. Having been heavily invested in the music culture of Trinidad and Tobago, Kenny Phillips has been able to attract a cadre of calypsonians, soca artists, parang artists, chutney and soca and gospel artists to his studio to perform live, record, and be financially viable even in these uncertain times of the pandemic. So we're looking at a trajectory now, and I'm starting with March 2020, which was the first known case of the coronavirus in Trinidad and Tobago. So this marked a significant change in what was taking place with us. So the first step was the acknowledgement of COVID-19. Then in Trinidad and Tobago, there was a national lockdown. So that meant that the borders themselves, the air and sea borders, were locked down. Now we turn to the post-carnival season, and we speak here about the fact that every year in Trinidad and Tobago, there is Trinidad Carnival, which is actually a pre-Lenten festival, and it's filled with lots of competitions. So when I speak here about the need for carnival winners, in quotation marks, to perform their hits, I'm talking about those persons who would have attained the crown or would have won in their various competitions. There was a need for them to then explore the opportunities internationally, as I mentioned, of the Calypsonians earlier in this presentation, who would leave Trinidad and Tobago and would go to New York, as an example, and other parts of the international space, Latin America, etc., to perform after their carnival winning season. In this particular case, we see that WAC, a culture-crazy radio station, enters the scenario and started looking for a way to generate funds based on the stay-at-home measures imposed by the TNT government as part of the response to COVID-19. On March 29, 2020, collaborating with the fundmetTNT.com platform, the CEO of WAC, Mr. Phillips, and his co-host, Mr. Desmond, live streamed a tune-for-tune sort of DJ battle. This show was such a huge success for a regular Sunday program and the funds that amassed were 11,000 Trinidad and Tobago dollars. I must tell you that the exchange rate is 6-to-1 to the US. Following through on this new opportunity to make money during COVID-19, soon WAC FM launched a series of live stream concerts on the platform. And the format is a simple one. People see the show for free and pay what they can via the fundmetTNT.com website. Viewers could tune in via YouTube, Facebook, and fundmetTNT.com and enjoy shows featuring all local talent. Trinidad and Tobago had the good fortune, and when I spoke earlier about all is not lost, this is what I'm talking about. Trinidad and Tobago had the good fortune to have staged Carnival 2020. And this is an important point because with the onset of the pandemic in many other places across the globe, from perhaps since January 2020, it was not yet acknowledged in Trinidad and Tobago until March 2020. And Carnival 2020 took place in February of that year. However, most Calypsonians and Carnival winners had not had the opportunity after the acknowledgement of the pandemic in March 2020, and now there was a challenge after they would have won the March Gras and Carnival Tuesday competitions. WAC 90.1 FM filled the gap, this radio station filled the gap for both performance opportunities and survival options in the post-Carnival season. To date, WAC has hosted over 170 shows, and I must tell you that by now it has gone up to now almost 300 shows on their website, raising over 1.5 million TT. Again, that exchange rate to the US dollar is 6-1, providing a platform for nostalgia, as most of the patrons are North Americans residing in the diaspora. In addition, this initiative has expanded the opportunity for nationals of Trinidad and Tobago to experience calypso, soca, parang, chutney soca, and steel pan culture in cyberspace. Now, this list of musical genres that I just gave are all indigenous to Trinidad and Tobago. The third success factor has been to provide a steady stream of income for artists to maintain some semblance of their career and viability during the pandemic. Now let's look a little bit at power to the performers, because this is really a presentation talking about people power movements. Prior to COVID-19, the Culture Crazy radio station was hard pressed to even reach 8,000 subscribers. However, with the launch of the virtual shows, figures doubled. In speaking in an interview to the CEO of this radio station, he told me, you have to spend money to make money. And so he outlined the cost that he has to put out each time there is this live broadcast of a show. Looking at between 19,500 to 20,000 TT, which covers space rental, the PA system, lighting, camera equipment and cameramen, bandwidth, advertising, radio broadcast, paying the DJs, constructing the set design, and other sundry particulars. But we maintain that this is a win-win arrangement, because in terms of the profits, we look at the 50% that goes to the station and the 50% that is paid out to the performer. Let's look now at Calypso successes, because this presentation is also focusing on the Calypso Experience. In collaboration with the Trinbago Unified Calypsonians Organization, TUCO, WAC launched the new Calypso tent series. So let me give you a little sense of what a Calypso tent is. A Calypso tent is actually a concert where Calypsonians assemble together with an audience. They perform their Calypsos, and it's actually like a competition. It's a preliminary competition, follow-up competitions that take place as we move to the semifinals, and then we move to the finals. And so this new Calypso 10 series was an important activity in this whole trajectory, because the Calypsonians look forward to the competition to attain bragging rights and also to amass a lot of money. And these featured 7 shows, and they're listed other shows. There was showcase productions from the Tuco South Zone, Kaiso Caravan from the East Zone, Calypso Review, another tent, Classic Russo from the North Zone, and the mother of all tents, and we see that would have been Kaiso House. Now, this brand new approach to the Calypso tent, which is usually in the pre-COVID days, a face-to-face activity, amassing almost 300 persons at any one given time, was now online. And so we had patrons looking online to the performances and seeing the competitions from these Calypsonians. What did this actually do in terms of a success? It created the opportunity for the reemergence and the reinsertion of the Calypso art form into the psyche of the nation of Trinidad and Tobago and nationals abroad. And this is considered a win on all counts. And so what we want to look at here are these issues of the movement, people power movements, idea of power, disempowerment, and empowerment during the pandemic. Firstly, the existence of TNT Carnival created power and gave this kind of power to all of the performers during the pandemic. And the reason that this is so important is because worldwide, there was a shutdown of performances. And as we had looked at the international music industry, there was a halt. And so it is quite interesting that we could discuss that Trinidad and Tobago had this opportunity to continue using this technological space. We saw evidence of disempowerment with the total shutdown of the TNT national borders, which prevented the carnival winners from seizing the power to make money and perform and further their careers. And then we saw a reemergence or a creation of empowerment, which is the creation of the performance and fund accumulation opportunities via the WAC online streaming platform. And now I want to share with you some flyers for you to see the expanse and the width and the breadth of some of the shows that we would have had on this platform. There was a particular series that was created called Up Close and Personal, and this is one of the artists that would have been featured, Heat designer Tyler, focusing on his music in terms of his Calypso offering. We would have also had steel pan music, and I mentioned this, and this is parang music, but this also had steel pan music. Parang music is known as Christmas music that originates or is indigenous to Trinidad and Tobago. It is Latin in nature, and it is as a result of the migration that took place from individuals from Venezuela, which is our next door neighbor, to the south from South America. This is a band that would have performed Los Tocadores. Then we look at Calypso itself in terms of celebrating Calypsonians. Unfortunately, during the period, we lost one of our female stalwarts of Calypso, who would have been singing Sandra. And we use this technological platform to actually have this retrospective, this memorial on her work, and invited other female Calypsonians to sing along. We also had the opportunity to have the Calypso tent that I referenced earlier. And this is a pictorial giving you a sense of the name of the tent, the Calypso Review, and it's the new Calypso tent experience, bringing people from all across the globe, wherever people are within the diaspora, that Caribbean diaspora, to become involved in Calypso. Unfortunately, we also had in the Caribbean this volcano eruption in St. Vincent and the Grenadines. And the platform was used by WAC to actually host a gospel benefit in order to send funds to individuals in the challenged country of St. Vincent and the Grenadines. We also had the celebration of Calypsonians, and we see this is Calypsonian Contender, and we note there from the flyer that it says he was celebrating his 55th year in Calypso, or Kaiso as Calypso is also known. And we use this platform as well to allow other Calypsonians to perform. Now, this in particular is not or was not a competition. And so the platform is used for both competition and regular shows as well. Finally, I want to share with you an example of a birthday celebration. This is one of our very, very successful Calypsonians, having a very, very long career in the art form. Super Blue is his name, and he was celebrating his birthday, and we used the opportunity of this particular platform to share his music and have other persons perform with him. Okay, and so what I want to now do is I want to share some music. I'm hoping that I am able to share this music for you to hear. Okay, so I want you to listen to this particular song by the Mighty Sparrow. It's called A Slave from Africa, so that you can get a sense of what Calypso music sounds like.
I'm a slave from a land so far. I was caught and I was brought here from Africa. I'm a slave from a land so far. I was caught and I was brought here from Africa. Well, it was leaks like fire from the white slave master. Every day I dawn my knees, weeks and weeks before we crossed the seas to reach in the West Indies. And then they make me walk. I said I walk. Good Lord, no pay. I toil, I toil, I toil, I toil, I toil hard each day. I'm dying. I'm crying. Oh, Lord, I want to be free.
Okay, and I want to share another song. And so this is so important for us to really interrogate the Calypso art form. There you got a live performance from Calypsonian Sparrow. I'm now going to share with you another performance, and this is by Black Stallion, and the name of the song is Bunda.
Judgment morning, I'm by the gate and I'm waiting, because I'm begging the master, give me our quick Peter. If some sinners coming, with them I go be dealing, because the things that they do me, I want to fix them personally. Peter wait, Peter look Cecil Rhodes by the gate. Peter look the Englishman, we send Cecil Rhodes to Africa land. Peter take Drake, take Raleigh, but leave Victoria for me. Peter I just don't care what you say, but Mussolini he can't get away. Why? This is my time for Monday. I'm burning and I'm burning and I'm burning and I'm burning. Blazing.
And so that song is really speaking about burning out all of the ills and negativity that exist of leaders in the international arena. We've just looked at two males, and I want to now look at some females. Hope that I can get. Okay, it seems as though I'm not able to get up there. Okay, yes I am. This is by Singing Sandra, and the name of this song is Voices from the Ghetto.
Happy New Year!
The sun rises slowly over the hills. Everywhere is cold and sunlight, but still, most nights with hotels are crowded. Their days and dark days are shrouded. They don't smile and they never will. Only vultures get their fill. Empty promises is what they get. No running water from year to year. Hearts that no one desire. That if there is a Messiah, someday hear the whispered prayer. Covered always bare and scanty. 10 people in a one-bedroom shanty. Boss to sell on the pavement. No vacancy, no employment. Cattle firecracker from gunshot. The dust blow and things get hot. Afraid to look out my window. So your voices up. I hear you. Sing the chorus. Yeah. they're crying. Yeah.
And so we see the performance there of a female calypsonian. Now, this is singing Sandra, and this is the woman that I referenced earlier in the presentation who actually died during the pandemic. And this is when we would have had that kind of memorial celebration for her. And this is the last video that I'm going to be showing. What I want to capture here is the transfer of the ages, because calypso is not necessarily an art form that is only performed by persons who are of a particular age group. We see that there are young people who are also performing in calypso. Now, this is one of our younger female performers, and her name is Karine Ashe.
One thing in life that you must avoid, guaranteed to drive you paranoid. Negative people, oh gosh. Negative people. They exist just to kill your dream, all your passion and your self-esteem. Negative people, oh gosh. Negative people. You alone control how far you could go. So take another road when they tell you no. To make you feel gun shy is their only game. Oh, oh. No matter how they try, they can't out your flame. So no matter what you meet in life, no matter the pain or strife, don't give up, no, don't give up. You only fail when you fail to try, so don't stop trying. Winners never quit, quitters never win.
Okay, and so that brings me to the end of my presentation in terms of my sharing on people power movement, and in particular looking at festival culture, looking at carnival as that festival in Trinidad and Tobago, and really focusing on calypso music and what really took place in terms of COVID-19 pandemic and how Trinidad and Tobago was able to rise above that, specifically looking at the music industry. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Megan. That was very nice and lively. Uh, Anybody want to pose a question? Please unmute, or you can enter something in the chat. And Megan, can you see the chat in the?
I'm not. I just saw some hands going up, but I'm not seeing.
Yep, that's virtual applause.
Okay.
And the rest of us are kind of telepathing it to you.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Yes. No, I'm not seeing the chat. Right. Yes.
Okay, well, everybody, there is the potential to unmute at the bottom of the screen, so please feel free to ask Megan your questions.
I have a question. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Okay. I was just wondering the symbolism of the dancing to the calypso music. Because I'm Dominican and the movements look similar to like salsa or yeah.
Okay, so in particular, we're looking here at the African tradition. So I've been using the word indigenous a lot in terms of this presentation, in terms of understanding the music that's coming out of Trinidad and Tobago. And of course, I would have started off speaking about issues related to European expansion, colonization, enslavement, etc. And so you would have had those elements. So you have the different, in terms of the demography of the peopling of Trinidad and Tobago, you would have definitely had the European presence, and you would have also had, that was in particular, French, Spanish, and British, because those would have been the European colonizers in the main who would have been in Trinidad and Tobago, all right? And then you have the African element coming in. And so you also had, as I mentioned later on in the presentation, the migration from Venezuela. So you would have seen that there is this merging of the cultures. So that when you see the dance formation, when you hear the music, you recognize that it's a melting pot of all of those traditions and practices. Yeah,
Great. Thank you so much.
you're welcome.
So how did you keep up with your music during COVID-19?
How did we keep up with it?
How did you keep up with it?
Okay, I'm not too sure I understand your question.
How do you keep up with your music when you're not actually at your work office during COVID-19?
Okay. Now, one of the things that we would have done is that there are persons, as I indicated, Mr. Phillips, who is the CEO of WAC Radio and TV, etc., and has this station and the studio as well. He would invite the performers to come there to actually perform. All right. So what people were actually doing is writing. Persons actually continue to write new music during the pandemic. So the first year, which would have been 2020, they would have had the fortune to have Carnival in February 2020, when the rest of the world, for the most part, was locked down or beginning to be locked down. We had a physical face-to-face Carnival. And in terms of 2021, what artists and performers within the music industry decided to do was to write new music for virtual Carnival. And that's actually quite interesting, because we understand, of course, that in other spaces, because persons could not perform live, there was a sort of, relaxation of that intent. But with this opportunity that was provided by this virtual space, people were actually launching new music in cyberspace. And so that would have been one of the ways to keep up with the new music and to encourage persons within the Caribbean, Trinidad and Tobago, and the worldwide diaspora to still remain connected to Trinidad and Tobago music during the pandemic.
I have a question.
Yes.
My family is from the Caribbean as well, which has made me go and perform in different carnivals. I've been in the United States as well as the islands, but I have never done Trinidad's carnival. So what do you think is the main difference between Trinidad? I know Trinidad and Brazil have the two largest carnivals in the world. So what are the differences you think between Trinidad and other Caribbean carnivals?
Well, and thank you for that question. Just as you mentioned, the first thing would be the scale of it. All right. So let's just give a little timeline to show that absolute difference. Now, the first fete or the first celebration of Carnival is in July of any year. Now, as I said, Carnival in Trinidad and Tobago is an annual festival. The first event takes place in July, and the last event takes place, as I said, it's a pre-Lenten celebration. So the last event takes place, all right, right before Lent. And so what happens, so that would be the Tuesday, and then Lent would be that Ash Wednesday. So we have, give or take, 6 or 7 months fully of performances, of activity. Another difference, other than the sheer space and the timeline, would be the competitions. I mentioned in the presentation that you have a lot of Calypso competitions. In addition to that, we have soca music competitions. As I said, soca music is a derivative of Calypso music, and you have various variants. So let me give you an idea. You have fusion music coming out of Trinidad and Tobago, where you have chutney music, which is originally music that's Asian in nature. You merge that with soca music and you get chutney soca. All right. You also have traditional North American R&B music. You merge that with soca music and you get groovy soca. All right. I also mentioned that there is parang music, which is this indigenous Christmas music, which is sung sometimes in Spanish and in English. You merge that with soca music and you get parang soca. You have all of those elements being performed within Trinidad Carnival. You also have steel pan music. This is this traditional instrument that was created in Trinidad and Tobago, the steel drum. And the history of that, let me give a quick history, because we would have had the presence of oil, that is crude oil, discovered in Trinidad and Tobago. The oil was actually put in steel drums. And when they had to be used, this is when the oil had to be used, the drums were opened and discarded. And those discarded drums is that was taken up by individuals, and they created and they sounded it out. They created notes and tones, etc., and they created the steel pan. That music is very dominant in Trinidad and Tobago Carnival. There are steel pan competitions, and sometimes you have small bands, medium bands, and large bands. And so that is another element that is different within Trinidad Carnival, juxtaposed to the other carnivals. We have Kiddies Carnival, or Carnival for the Children, where they masquerade in the streets of the islands, of both islands, and get an opportunity to perform and dance to the music. We also have large bands. And when I say bands, I'm talking about the carnival bands of masqueraders. The bands, the masquerading in Trinidad is actually what carnival is all about, because it's about putting on your mask, all right? And it's actually similar to, you mentioned Brazil, but it's also similar to the New Orleans Carnival, because I would have spoken earlier about that French element. And so you have, we use words like Dimanche Gras, Big Sunday, and we also have a Juve, which is the opening of Carnival. And so we have those sort of elements as well. All right. So Juve is when you have dirty mass, all right, where you have this juxtaposition of the pretty mass with beads and feathers that you would see in Brazilian Carnival, but you also have Dirty Mass, which takes place on Carnival Monday, where you have people dressing up. Perhaps if you have ever been to New Orleans and you're familiar with the whole Indian carnival that they have there, where they dress in Indian costumes, putting on Indian costumes. We also have that in Trinidad Carnival. So I've just given you a series of differences, yeah, of different approaches that we take to Trinidad Carnival that may or may not be a part of the smaller carnivals that exist within the Caribbean region.
What is the global reach of the carnival culture? Presumably, it resonates far beyond the Western Hemisphere. I used to live in Notting Hill in London, and right on Great Western Road, and the carnival used to come right past our flat. I didn't have to, venture very far to enjoy it. Quite magnificent, and actually founded by someone from Trinidad, I think in the 1970s. Um, is there a similar, does it have a counterpart in, say, Germany, in, Eastern Europe, Russia, even the Far East, or is it very much a kind of Western phenomenon?
Well, thank you for that question, Dr. Brown. Carnival has a vast reach, and in Trinidad and Tobago, we like to consider Trinidad Carnival to be the greatest show on earth, meaning that it is believed, it is conjured up in our literature that Carnival, strictly speaking, was born and bred in Trinidad and Tobago. And we have satellite carnivals taking place. So first I will deal with the Caribbean region, where you have, for example, Grenada. The island of Grenada has Spice Mass. In St. Vincent and the Grenadines, which I referenced in the presentation in terms of that eruption of that volcano, you also have Vincy Mass. You just mentioned Notting Hill, and of course you have Notting Hill Carnival. You also have Caribana taking place in Canada. In the United States, you have Miami Carnival, which recently finished. You also have DC Carnival, you have LA Carnival, you have Atlanta Carnival. Of course, you have the Labor Day celebration taking place in New York. But you also mentioned Germany. And there is that special relationship between Trinidad and Tobago and Germany. In years gone by, there used to be a German embassy in Trinidad and Tobago, which actually facilitated the movement of people and the culture in Germany. I am not too certain about whether there is that infiltration, as you mentioned, in some of those European spaces, but I know that there's a dominance of French culture. So there's an aspect of it that would be in French speaking spaces. All right. If we return to the Caribbean, understanding though that if we look at Martinique and Guadeloupe, they are still departments of France, and what you see is an example of carnival taking place there. It looks a little different to what happens within Trinidad and Tobago, and let's say in Cropover in Barbados or Jamaica, that has started up their carnival that is growing, by leaps and bounds. But we see that there is a reach across the globe. Yeah. We know that, of course, there are elements of it in Latin America. We have been having discussions about going as far as Australia in terms of taking the music and taking the culture. And so that is part of what we do in terms of in Trinidad and Tobago, in our Ministry of Culture, and in particular, this referencing this organization, TUCO, which is the Trinbago Unified Calypsonians Organization, which has responsibility for calypso music. And so sometimes when we talk about the reach or the public engagement of carnival, we can also be talking about calypso music as an element or steel pan music as an element. So in terms of reach of carnival, you may not necessarily have the physicality of the street parade and the dressing up in the costumes, but there may be that reach for carnival to the music. So you would have calypso music and steel pan music infiltrating the globe worldwide.
Professor Sylvester, can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Good morning. Good morning. Awesome presentation. I just wanted to thank you as well. My name is Doran, and I'm an employee here at Finger Lakes Community College. And I was reading one of the comments in the chat, well, one of the questions in the chat box, and I also have a question as well. But this question was focusing more on generations and roots as well. So I wanted to say this and ask this, because much of the music you played reminds me of the message of Bob Marley and songs like Buffalo Soldier. And it's vital to make mention of the African diaspora because not many people who are descendants of those who were enslaved know this. But there's sort of a discrimination between many Caribbean groups, especially when it comes to dating and marriage. And I wanted to just get your insight and knowledge as to where you think this stems from.
You're talking about the disparity that takes place or the challenges that take place in terms of marriage, etc. Could you just repeat the last part? Just want to be clear that I answered the question.
Sure. Yeah. So I was saying that there's sort of discrimination between many Caribbean groups, especially when it comes to dating and marriage. And I just wanted to get your insight and knowledge as to where you think this stems from. Like myself, right? I'm half Jamaican. I had a conversation with someone who's Trini, and they had shared that that basically relatives is like we don't really shack up or mingle with the Jamaicans, and it's not just between them, but it's like I said within multiple different Caribbean groups. So I just wanted to get your insight and knowledge as to where do you think this stems from.
That's a very interesting question. Wonderful sociological framing. You know, I mentioned earlier that there were several European colonizers that would have come to the region. In particular, you would have had in Trinidad and Tobago, I mentioned. But let me just say that Trinidad and Tobago, for the audience, it's two islands. All right. It's a twin island economy. But the interesting thing is there was a time when Tobago was not annexed or attached to Trinidad. So in terms of European presence in Trinidad, we're talking about French, Spanish, and English, all right, or British. But in Tobago, for example, you would have had the presence of the Dutch and the Welsh and the Irish and the French, but you did not have much of a Spanish influence there, all right? So I can actually speak to the whole issue about some of the challenges that take place in terms of Tobagonians, as they're called, interacting, marrying, living well with Trinidadians. But then you also reference Jamaicans and Trinidadians. And there's also this divide in terms of Guyanese and Bajans. And from my framing, from my understanding, it's really because of the division that took place during European colonization and expansion. I think that there was because the islands were, there were so many of these wars that were fought for the grab of land, for the pillage and the plunder. You have islands based on their space. For example, Jamaica is known to have more landmass, of course, and the population is about 2.4 million persons, juxtaposed to, let's say, Trinidad and Tobago, which has 1.4 million persons. You have other islands like Barbados and the Grenadines, which are smaller. And so I think that competition and that disquiet that Caribbean people have with one another in terms of their interaction and even, getting married, etc., forming relationships really stemmed from the divisions that were created during European colonization. Because what I have found is when you have a space where the dominant identity is Caribbean, you see a lot more synergies taking place. But when you have to pit people against each other based on the individual island identity, then I think it becomes that ugliness sort of rears its head. And you have ways to stratify, ways to create division within those communities. And that's the way that I look at it. Because when we look at this totalizing view, all right, it's like juxtaposing persons from Africa, persons from um, the United States in terms of African American and Caribbean American people. There's a lot of division between those three groups, with Africans thinking that perhaps persons who are African Americans are not really African, with
Right.
African Americans thinking that people who are Caribbean American are not really Black, and all of these kinds of intersections. And I think that when it comes down to it, we have to look at how were all of these groups colonized. We know that the European colonized went into Africa and they did a job there. When we look at writings like Walter Rodney, how Europe underdeveloped Africa, and we look at those kinds of discussions that take place, and then we look at Frantz Fanon talking about what would have happened in certain parts of the Caribbean. We understand what's really happening in terms of the divisions that were created during European expansion. So I think that is really what started, or was the catalyst to those kinds of realities. Yeah.
Thank you. Yes,
You're welcome.
appreciate it.
There's a comment in the chat or a question. I'll read it. Have you noticed any newer generations of mixed race becoming more involved with calypso or any other music related to cultural music to learn deeper into their roots or background? Also, can you see this type of way to teach our younger generation in high school to learn more about the background of African tradition?
Okay. So to the first part of the question, most definitely. I didn't get an opportunity to share, and Trinidad has a lot of music, And I want to reference in particular Kes de Fentala, who is actually mulatto, and and if you can think of former President Obama, and you think about that mulatto look, and he actually continues to perform. He came into the art form, and he came singing rock music, and then slowly his music changed. All right, because he's a lighter skinned person of African descent, he would have gone through a lot of tumult, a lot of difficulty being embraced by the art form and by the performers, because calypso music is, strictly speaking, a male dominated Afrocentric art form. Why? Because it's talking about the atrocities that would have taken place. One, calypso music has been used in the main to talk about political issues and social issues, originally focusing on the atrocities that slaves would have gone through on the plantation, and then also being used to poke fun at the slave masters, and adding to that a humorous element to treat with or to deal with the unfair treatment that was taking place on the plantation. And so because of that, calypso music rose up as African dominated. So when you have someone who is mulatto or lighter skinned entering the space, they have to go through that type of assessment training ground. So he is actually quite young, and he has had many successful hits, being on the CBS morning show and being on shows within the United States, as well as having that reach globally. So that is also important to note. In addition to Kes, there have been other persons who are young, and they are indeed coming in. One of the points I want to make about calypso music is that often you hear that calypso music is dying, or is going into a state of abeyance. And it is important to know that every single year we have calypso competitions taking place in Trinidad and Tobago. What does that mean? Why is that even valuable? The competition means that every year there has to be absolutely new content. And one of the things that we've done is opened up the competition to persons who are within the ages between, let's say, 5 and 13, and going all the way up to 18. So we have those ranges taking place so that as you have young people entering the sphere and also getting the opportunity to perform and compete, it ensures the longevity and the continuation of the art form. Because there's been a lot of mixing of cultures, because Trinidad and Tobago, for example, was one of the least populated islands in the Caribbean. So we have been on the receiving end of a lot of migratory movements to Trinidad and Tobago. In particular, we would have had movements coming from other islands within the Caribbean, but because, let's say, of work, we would have a lot of Cuban nurses and doctors coming to Trinidad and Tobago and having that presence there. You would have had Filipinos coming there for that same, being involved in the health sector. And because of that, you had that opportunity for the mixing of the cultures. And so you have that presence there taking place. Offspring of those groups together with Trinidadians and Tobagonians then automatically get involved in either the calypso art form or the soca art form. Kes is a soca performer. That's what I was referencing earlier. And they also perform in steel pan music. So you have elements of that. Dr. Brown, I know there was a second part of the question. Could you repeat it for me, please? I'm not hearing you.
Sorry. Also, can you see this type of way to teach our younger generation in high school to learn more about the background of the African tradition?
Okay, and thank you for that question. Now, one of my hats, I know that Vera would have given an overview of me, but one of my hats is that I am on the board of this organization that I reference, which is the Trinbago Unified Calypsonians Organization, TUCO. Now, this organization is responsible for dissemination of Calypso culture in Trinidad and Tobago and the region. On the board, my position is the Education and Research Director. And I have been in this position since 2016. One of the activities or the outreach projects that I'm involved in is literally taking Calypso music to the secondary schools to introduce young people to the music. Now, there has been a space created for that within the curricula, but it is not yet fully involved. And so part of my remit is to take the music. In the pre-COVID days, I would physically go to the schools and I would engage several schools across the two islands. Now, in the COVID times, what I've been doing is I'm having online presentations, speaking to various aspects of Calypso and Trinidad and Tobago culture and getting to the younger people. This is also done in collaboration with the Junior Calypso Competition Committee. And so they go to a certain section of the school age population, and I go to the other part. And so we ensure by doing this that we are covering ground of the continuation and the longevity and the sustainability, more importantly, of the Calypso art form in Trinidad and Tobago.
Dr. Wisman, you typed in an interesting question into the chat. Do you want to articulate that to Professor Sylvester?
Sure. It actually goes back to when you were talking about the sort of the colonial roots of divisions on the basis of nationality, and I would imagine also language and other borders. But so the question that I asked was, so is it that a pan-Caribbean identity is a resistance to colonialism? And also, it seems to me kind of a healing from colonialism. Could you speak to that?
Okay. All right. And I think I also want to reference something that Monique asked in her question and that Doran Allen Carr mentioned when he was also speaking about their experience within their community. Yes, Caribbean music, in particular Calypso music, is about resistance. I know that Doran would have mentioned, hearing elements of reggae music, etc. And so what we're talking about is it's resistance music. So when we look at reggae music and we look at Calypso music, it is resistance music. It's talking, it's resisting, right? Because remember when we mentioned the whole issue of calypso music and its genesis in terms of what the slaves were actually doing when they were singing these original songs, which I must mention were not sung in English, but they were sung in the patois of the day. So if you had a French colonial master, you would have been singing in broken French. If you had a Spanish, yeah, colonial master, so you would have been, and that would have been together with that language or that dialect that you were bringing across from Africa. And so this is definitely resistance music. That is what calypso music is, which is different, I might add, to soca music, which is more party music. But that is what we are dealing with. And so you do have those elements coming in terms of what is sung, what are the themes of the music, what is the intention in terms of reaching an audience, and why you would want to speak to the whole issue of resistance and that kind of identity. Now, it becomes important to understand that the presence of the European colonizers had an impact on each island differently. If we look at Jamaica, we see later on in its history the presence of Germans and Jews. We also have a similar thing taking place in Tobago, where a lot of persons would have come from Germany. And I know that Dr. Brown mentioned, the diasporic reach of Carnival earlier, mentioning Germany. You actually had a lot of Germans coming to Tobago, that second island of the twin island economy, because they had heard the music in Germany and wanted to come, and they actually came and they migrated and came to live in Tobago. And so you have those kinds of identity formations taking place within Trinidad and Tobago and within the Caribbean in terms of new identities being founded and created as a result of these cross-cultural collaboration. Yeah.
Do you think that Caribbean music has been type of like a unifying aspect for all of the Caribbean nations? Because even though soca and calypso are respected to Trinidad and Tobago, I still know like Machel Montano. I love him. And we listen to a lot of it in carnivals from where my family's from. So do you think that plays a major part in the unification of the islands as opposed to the separation of them?
Okay. Thank you for that, Monique. Yes, I actually do agree. And this is what I was mentioning earlier. When we remove the demarcations that have been created by the European colonizers, and when we focus on, what we have to offer. So as a region, and I want to make this point, I've been saying that calypso music, of course, is part of the indigenization of music in Trinidad and Tobago, but we recognize, Monique, and as you're mentioning, the whole issue of the presence of calypso music or variants of it in other parts of the Caribbean. And of course, music, usually sport as well, is used as a totalizing or coalescing force to bring people together. And so when you go, you say you know Machel Montano, who of course is from Trinidad and Tobago, and there's so many other performers across the region, from Barbados, from Guyana, from St. Vincent and the Grenadines, when they all conglomerate or get together for carnival or calypso or carnival activities, what happens is that the people become one. So yes, the music is used as a unifier. And Vera, I know that this is something that you were also asking about earlier. Music is really used as a unifier for the region. And even when we look at the response, because when we look at festival culture the world over, one of the things that a music sociologist like myself would do is we look to see the response of the crowd, of the space, the way in which the people enjoy, imbibe the culture, and what are some of those signifiers that we want to identify to translate that into the next performance, to translate that into another experience in another space. And so we see that there's a way in which the music really coalesces and helps to do that in terms of its representation. Yeah? So thank you for that, Monique.
Valentina posed a similar question in the chat. Valentina, did that answer your question?
Yeah, mostly pretty much. My question was just specifically about the early development of Calypso and whether there was whether it played a role in communicating messages between like remote rural communities, like other similar or not similar, but maybe like cousin music forms did.
Okay, and thank you for that. What you would have had would have been the use of the pidgin or the dialect or the language that would have been used, like the patois, being used to send messages. And so we have this French term that we use in Calypso. It's called double entendre. And what we're talking about there is the whole issue of the double meaning. So in the earlier times, let me give you an example. There would have been the posting of a U.S. naval ship in the Chagaramas area in Trinidad and Tobago during the 1940s. And so what you would have had was the presence of these naval officers, and they were being entertained by Calypsonians who would come to the base in order to entertain them. And at that time, and in other times throughout the history of Calypso, the use of double entendre, which is this double meaning, is a feature that is used by the Calypsonians who write the songs and in terms of the performance style. What is that really talking about? You are using the English words that have this double meaning, and so only the persons who really are in tune with the reality of what is taking place understand what's happening. So at one level, you have the naval officers hearing a song and just thinking they're being entertained. And at another level, you have persons who are within the audience as well, understanding what's happening. And so that is another way to carry the messages. And messages were being carried. Later on in the history of Calypso, talking now specifically about the Calypso tent, you would have ministers of government and members of the opposition. All right, because of course we have the Westminster system in Trinidad and Tobago, following in that British tradition in terms of our government. And you would have them coming to the Calypso tents, and you would have the Calypsonians actually singing about their policies, singing about the way in which they're running the country, singing about issues of corruption and strife in the society, but using that technique of double entendre. And what that then did is that you had the double meaning. Those who understood at a particular level then understood the message that was being carried, while there were other persons who had no clue what was taking place. And so that we take back to the whole issue of that African tradition with the slaves when they first came across, yeah, to the Caribbean and of course the southern United States as well, in terms of understanding how to use indigenous art forms to send messages.
I have to relay this question because some version of it's appeared twice now in the chat, most recently by Tanaya. What are your favorite Calypso artists, and how do they have a positive impact on you?
That's interesting. Wow. There's a length and a breadth of Calypso artists. I would have played some of my favorites, in particular Calypsonian Sparrow. I would have played Black Stalin. And just to have that balance, I would have shown Singing Sandra, who recently passed, and I would have shown younger Karina Ashi. There are many, many Calypsonians, but I think that in particular, there's this Calypsonian called Shadow. And his music is really, excuse me, his music is really separate and apart from others in many ways because of the themes that he would have focused on. And I think it's important in terms of the lyrical content of a particular Calypsonian. When you speak to, excuse me, speak to issues that are impacting the country as a whole, as I mentioned, political, social, humor, those are the elements that I would look for in a particular Calypso that really speaks to me as an individual. All right. There are many Calypsonians who are humorous. For example, they poke fun at the government and the opposition. There are those that focus on political issues, those that focus on social issues, issues of economics, family issues, issues of domestic violence, issues of sexual harassment. You find that more women tend to have specific themes, and that's an important thing to note. Men and women in Calypso, or female and male Calypsonians, sing different themes on different themes. And so that is what sort of guides my interest in Calypso in terms of my love for Calypso and what is featured. Yeah.
Okay, we're close to the end of the period, but if there's any final thoughts or questions, please feel free to unmute.
I see that there's a question here about what is my favorite Calypso song. I would say it would be a song by Calypsonian Sparrow, and it's entitled Good Citizen. If you have an opportunity to go on YouTube and listen to it, it really gives the same idea that I was speaking about earlier, which is this double entendre and this double meaning. As I said, it's Calypsonian Sparrow, and the name of the song is Good Citizen. On the face of it, it sounds as though we're talking about what does it take to be a good citizen. And this song is from earlier in the history of Calypso. But then when you read into it, it's talking about the fact that some people actually are seen to be good citizens when they are involved in corruption. But it's really saying it's a juxtaposition of, sort of like this Marxian philosophy of the proletariat and the bourgeoisie, and who is really seen to have currency and credibility in the society. Who really makes up a good citizen? Is it those who are the haves, those are the have-nots, those who are honest, those who are dishonest? So it's that interplay of words. It's really craftily written, and it's really an opportunity. You should listen to it. Good Citizen by Calypsonian Sparrow.
Oh, thanks for that recommendation. I think Professor Heller has a question.
Yeah, just a quick question. So you showed a couple of YouTube clips. I noticed that many of them were getting 500,000, 600,000 views. That's quite a large number. But I noticed some similarities uh, of the examples that you showed to what we know in the United States as the big band sound that was popular, let's say, in the 1940s, kind of the swing music that was also popular in the 1940s. And I'm just wondering if there are some, direct interconnections. I mean, you mentioned, I think, that early on in the history of Calypso, that Calypso performers would be participating in the New York City music scene. So there must have been some cross collaboration, throw in some, jazz and so on. So I'm just wondering if you see these connections as well.
Yes, indeed. So I would have referenced in the presentation the fact that there would have been exploitation of musical careers by Calypsonians going to the US. This would have started in the 1920s and continues to today. Part of what that did, and there's an example of a particular performer by the name of Sam Manning, and he actually came across to New York as a Calypsonian, and because he was in this space and jazz had become, by the 40s and the 50s, had become very, very dominant, there was that interplay and that fusion and the creation of a hybrid sound of Calypso music. Now, one of the things that would have happened, and I would have referenced this to a certain extent in the presentation, the fact that there would have been the migration, but there would have been bands existing within the US. Now, what happened is that because of the nature of Calypso music, at the time, it was felt that musicians who were in New York, or let's say New Orleans, or other parts of Latin America, may not have had the skill to play Calypso music to get that same sound. And so what happened is that instead of using the musicians who were necessarily in this space, there was also a further migration of musicians, like a backing band. I would have mentioned Lovey, I would have mentioned Gerald, York, etc. They would have had bands, and they would have migrated to the US to accompany the Calypsonians. But noting that there was a different audience that they had to play to, there was the development of the Calypso jazz. And interestingly, what we call it is Kaiso jazz. Now, Kaiso is another word for Calypso. And so I'm going to spell it Kaiso. And it's important that you look for Kaiso jazz. We now have a performer from Trinidad and Tobago by the name of Etienne Charles, who is a trumpeter, and he actually plays Kaiso jazz music. All right, he would have been schooled at Juilliard, etc. And it becomes important to listen to his music to get a sense of what we now consider to be Calypso jazz. But it would have started in those days when he would have had those Calypsonians coming to the US, experimenting with the music, recognizing that the audience, the strict Calypso audience, was not necessarily there, and they had to have that fusion, what they could bring with their Calypso training and what currently existed in the space to which they migrated or were exploiting for their career. And then you had the fusion of the music. So definitely that occurred.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Professor Sylvester. That was a wonderful presentation. Thank you very much for joining us. Is there a place that a website or something where we can direct people that want to find out more about your work?
Well, in particular, I just want to reference, and Dr. Brown, remember we would have spoken about this. Everyone, this is Calypso History Month. October has been dubbed Calypso History Month, and I just want to make that point clear. In particular, in terms of getting a sense of the Calypso events that are taking place within the diaspora, I want to refer you to TUCO's, TUCO, TUCO's Facebook and Instagram pages where we have listed Calypso events taking place. So that's the first thing. I also have a professional page on Facebook, and my website is in progress actually, where you can go on, you just type in my name, Megan Sylvester, music sociologist, and you can follow me and you can find get a sense of the work that I'm doing and the contributions that I'm making to Calypso, soca, and discussions on that nature. Yeah.
I have a quick question.
Mm-hmm. Yes, Daddy. Yeah.
Yes. I am the internal and external outreach of Alana, which stands for African American, Latino, Asian, and Native American. So I just wanted to know if we can have your contact information, and in case like we wanted to have you talk to our future events.
Okay, so I'm going to put my email address in the chat. All right. There it is.
Thank you so much.
Right. And I also want to mention that, of course, I have an Instagram page and I'm also on LinkedIn. Yes. So I am findable. My handle is TT Music Sister. All right. On all platforms other than LinkedIn. So you can find me.
Excellent. Thank you very much again. Hopefully we'll see you on this in the spring, or have you sort of better affiliated with our institution.
Thank you, Dr. Brown.
Thank you. Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Have a great day.
Okay.
Bye. Thank you.